So, really quick, if you haven't seen my most recent episode on Maria, make sure you check that episode out because this is a brand new commander that is brand newly broken. But don't leave just yet because on this episode, I'm going to be talking about a commander, well, that made me say, it happened, it finally happened, it is here. So to find out why I'm saying that, well, let's jump into it. So, the commander in this episode is Elas, sorry again for probably not pronouncing this correctly, Elas il-Kor Sadistic Pilgrim. We're gonna go with that. Anyways, a 2/2 Phyrexian Core Cleric because that's a thing that has Death Touch and it costs white-black. On top of that, it says, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. And of course, on top of that, whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Now, one of the reasons, and sure, yeah, why the episode is called this is because it finally happened. We have a Blood Artist, essentially, okay, more like a Zulport Cutthroat, basically, in the command zone. So, yeah, this can be an incredibly effective aristocrat-style commander that can drain your opponents quite quickly, and yes, gain you life as well, which also in some ways can also drain your opponents quite quickly, and we'll get to some ways to do that. But, one other thing. Now, as exciting as a Blood Artist in the command zone is, what also is incredibly exciting is the mana cost of this card. Specifically, well, its mana value. Because in Orzhov, we really haven't seen too many commanders that cost this little. And what that means is that because it has this mana cost, this mana value of 2, there's a certain thing that we can do with it. But really quick, before we jump into that and before we jump into the cards on this episode, a reminder that like all the other quick takes around commanders, there is a link in the description below to the card list for the cards I'm going to be talking about on this episode. Because when new exciting commanders are spoiled, well, sometimes cards tend to go up in price sooner than later, so make sure you check out that link in the description below, and if you are interested in some of those cards, consider picking some of them up. But now let's talk about the exciting reveal. And you might have guessed it, but yes, it finally happened. We finally have a decent commander. In fact, one that can be incredibly effective with a Lurrus companion. And okay, no offense to other commanders that fit the requirement, but really, not many do. I think, actually, this is technically the 6th commander, or, you know, there's some commander combinations, and again, we'll talk about it here in a bit. But yeah, not many at all can actually utilize Lurrus as a companion because of its companion requirement. Which, okay, let's just go through Lurrus. A 3/2 Cat Nightmare for 1 Orzhov companion. Each permanent card in your starting deck has converted mana cost 2 or less. So, yeah, that would include your commander. And yeah, there really aren't, again, a lot of Orzhov commanders out there that have a mana cost of 2 or less. So, Lurrus is one of those companions that really is limited in which commanders it can actually be a companion for. But now let's talk about why Lurrus especially can be a great companion. Well, first up as lifelink, which is nice, not really all that important, but I mean, okay, maybe that can come into play some places, but regardless, during each of your turns, you may cast 1 permanent spell with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard. This is a huge effect, in fact, one that, wait, let me check, got Lurrus banned in Modern and even Legacy. That's right, Lurrus is Legacy bannable power level. And on top of that, it's basically one of the reasons that Wizards had actually changed the companion rule from, you know, what you see on the card, which of course says, if this card is your chosen companion, you may cast it once from outside the game. They changed that with a little oopsie on their part to, if this card is your chosen companion, you may put it in your hand from outside the game for 3 anytime you cast a sorcery. But yeah, even with that little oopsie changed, it's still banned in Legacy and Modern. This is an incredible companion and one that can work incredibly well in an aristocrat-style strategy built around this brand new commander, Elas, whatever it is, il-Kor, Sadistic Pilgrim, which is again why the title of the episode was that it happened, it finally happened, because we finally have a fantastic commander for Lurrus companion. Fun times. Well, fun times for us. Now, really quick, I do want to mention, no offense to the other commanders that, yes, can also utilize Lurrus as a companion, like, Eiley, Killian, or Karlov. Yes, they definitely can utilize Lurrus as a companion, and some can be pretty effective. That being said, in my opinion, Lurrus, companion Lurrus, has been waiting for quite a while for a commander like this new one that is definitely a step above these or two when it comes to an aristocrat-style strategy. Again, essentially having a Blood Artist, or again, more so a Zulaport Cutthroat effect in your command zone seems pretty good for that kind of a strategy. So, of course, I also mean no offense to Miara, Thorn of the Glade, and Akiri, Lineslinger partner commanders that technically can utilize Lurrus as a companion, but again, these don't really work all that well together. It's like Elf, Tribal, but also Artifacts? So yeah, not as good of a fit. Or even some of our newer commanders like Wernog and Bjorna that, have access to 4 colors, but again, they're more like, artifact focused, clue focused. They're not really focused necessarily on aristocrat style strategy. And yes, this can still be, impactful with Lurrus, but I am more excited about this new commander. And for many reasons, which you'll see, let's go through the cards. Now again, like I mentioned, when, Lurrus is your companion, you can only utilize permanents that have 2 mana cost or less. Now, that being said, of course, there are a ton of incredible cards you can still utilize that are incredibly effective. And yeah, your crew is going to be so low to the ground with a deck like this. I mean, Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat, and Cruel Celebrant are just some fantastic, again, Blood Artist type effects, to name a few. Blood Artist is basically the one that started it all. Whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. The original Aristocrat strategy, I believe, was in Standard, and it, revolved basically around this card, and, some other ones, but yeah, basically draining with Blood Artist. And yeah, this can pack quite the punch throughout the game, especially since you can target it at a player. Now, that being said, Zulaport Cutthroat is also fantastic, and it's more like our commander, again, because basically this one drains all of our opponents. Whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. And then Cruel Celebrant is basically the exact same thing. Whenever it or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. Which I think basically is the exact same thing. The planeswalker part probably doesn't matter in this deck, again, because we cannot use planeswalkers that cost, more than 2. So there probably aren't any in these colors, I don't believe. Regardless, yeah, the more of these, draining effects that we have on these creatures, these Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat type effects, the better. And again, if they get dealt with, Lurrus can just get them back. So, of course, we can also utilize Corpse Knight, which says, whenever the creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. So this is kind of the other end of things. Again, our commander does care about creatures coming into play, but it gains this life when that happens, and this one drains. So, yeah, we can drain our opponents now when they come in or when they leave, etc., etc. Next up, we even have an enchantment that can help us out with an X spell with the Meat Hook Massacre. If you've got the budget for this one, I should say. I think this thing's really expensive. X black enters the battlefield. Each creature gets -X until end of turn, so it can be a board wipe. And on top of that, whenever a creature controlled dies, each opponent loses 1 life. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 1 life. So again, another different way to gain life, but also more importantly, draining opponents when our creatures die. But then there's Suture Priest, which kind of just turns it on its head. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may gain 1 life. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you may have that player lose 1 life. So again, with these draining effects, there's just a ton of different ways to drain our opponents and also to just gain some nice life. Again, we can pad our life total really well and also, drain our opponents throughout the game. And with all this life gain, well, we can utilize a card like Vizkopa Guildmage to really punish our opponents. It has pay 1 white black. Whenever you gain life this turn, each opponent loses that much life. So yeah, again, we've got a ton of ways to gain a lot of life, so our opponents are going to be in big trouble with this. Now, I will mention, I probably should include this episode too. I mean, cards like Warlock class can help us out too to double up on life loss. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to just gain benefits from either gaining a lot of life or making opponents lose life and doubling up on that. So make sure you keep those in mind. But again, make sure you're keeping in mind cards that have a converted mana cost of 2 or less. So even though certain cards might combo with Vizkopa Guildmage, yeah, most of those cards, or at least all those cards, I believe, are not within those requirements. Nevertheless, cards that are in those requirements are fantastic ones with Cathar Commando, Dothi Voidwalker, and Selfless Spirit. These are each creatures that can be sacrificed for a lot of value. Cathar Commando has pay 1, sacrifice, destroy target artifact or enchantment. And then Dothi Voidwalker says if a card be put into an opponent's grave from anywhere, exile instead with a void counter on it, tap, sacrifice it, choose an exile card an opponent owns with a void counter on it. You may play it this turn without paying its mana cost. So this can be a great way to steal something from our opponents and yes, cast it for free. And keep in mind that if we do get this back, Dothi, keeps track of all those things that we already had, so we don't lose out on those. We can just keep casting things again and again and again, thanks to Loris getting this back. Or we can keep protecting our things with Selfless Spirit. Sacrifice a creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Yeah, a 2-mana creature like that can help us out a ton throughout the game. Because, hey, opponents, our creatures don't die unless we want them to. And of course, we can get creatures back with Apprentice Necromancer, pay a black, tap, sacrifice it, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature gains haste at the beginning of the next end step, sacrifice it. So this can lead to some really big plays. Speaking of which, how about Kami of False Hope? Sacrifice it, prevent all combat damage that we dealt this turn. That's right, we've got a Fog Frog in these colors. That would be, Spore Frog is the reference, but yeah, we can keep getting Kami of False Hope back to fog our opponents again and again and again, and they're probably going to eventually quit. Regardless, we've got another somewhat fog in this deck as well with Children of Corliss, which says sacrifice it, you gain life equal to the life you've lost this turn. So that's kind of like a fog in a way. I mean, we still take the damage, from combat or whatnot, or life lost from other things, and then we're like, we would like that life back, please. Thank you. So yeah, with this kind of a deck, just definitely keep in mind all those kinds of permanents, especially creatures that you can utilize for, a sacrifice ability, essentially, that you can get value out of, and then you can get back, with Loris, or with other ways too that we'll talk about. But of course, outside of creatures sacrificing themselves, we've got plenty of great sacrifice outlets as well, like, Viserys here. Sacrifice a creature, scry 1. This, of course, can provide a lot of card selection throughout the game, and again, a free sacrifice outlet is crucial for an Aristocrat-style deck because, well, we can just keep sacrificing our creatures when we need to and drain our opponents out incredibly quickly and get whatever, other value we're getting from our creatures dying too. So, of course, we can also utilize Carrion Feeder, which become massive. It can't block, but we can sacrifice a creature to get a +1 counter on it. Next up, a repeatable sacrifice outlet that does require it to tap, but is still fantastic, is Priest of Forgotten Gods. Tap, sacrifice 2 other creatures. Any number of target players each lose 2 life and sacrifice a creature. You add black, and draw a card. That is a massive downside for opponents and a huge upside for us. And speaking of upsides on sacrifice outlets, there's Spawning Pit, which says sacrifice a creature, put a charge counter on Spawning Pit. And by paying 1, we can remove 2 charge counters from it to put a 2/2 spawn artifact creature token into play. So basically, sack 2 creatures, get 1, and yeah, again, this can lead to a lot of draining of our opponents when it comes to all those Blood Artist and Zulport Cutthroat type of effects. Like our commanders. Anyways, next up there's Pyre of Heroes, which has pay 2, tap, sacrifice a creature, search your life for a creature card that shares a creature type with the sacrifice creature, and has converted mana cost equal to 1 plus that creature's converted mana cost. Put that card on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Now, this one really depends on how you build the deck, but I mean, there are definitely some lines to play with this that can be fantastic. I mean, again, just consider, hey, okay, if I've got, another sacrifice out in play, but, I really want a draining effect in play as well. Okay, I'll sacrifice my Viserys here to maybe go get a Blood Artist. So, yeah, in the right deck, this can definitely help out in a lot of situations, on top of just being a great way to sacrifice creatures. And speaking of getting rid of creatures, well, there's Skull Clamp, which is not technically a sacrifice outlet, but it kind of is. Equip 1, equip creature gets +1, -1. When equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards. So this can take out our tiny creatures and draw us a ton of cards throughout the game. And speaking of value, there is Flesh Taker, which says whenever you sacrifice another creature, you gain 1 life and scry 1. And of course, by paying 1, we can sack a creature to give it +2/+2 until end of turn. So yet another way to gain life. And again, we've got plenty of ways to benefit from gaining life. And yeah, scrying is not necessarily card advantage, but it is fantastic card selection that can really help us out. What is card advantage, though, is Dawn of Hope, which actually works very well with Flesh Taker and, all of our other life-gaining abilities. It says whenever you gain life, you may pay 2. If you do, draw a card. And on top of that, we can pay 3 and a white to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. So yeah, more great creature fodder. And also, again, lifelink, which works very well, again, with our life abilities. Or I should say life triggers. You know what I mean. Next up, though, when it comes to tokens, some cards that can help us out a ton are Dreadhorde Invasion and Bitter Blossom if you want to drop a ton of money on something. Dreadhorde Invasion says, beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and amass 1, which again means we get a zombie army. And yeah, the way that armies work is basically it just goes up instead of wide. So yeah, make sure you just keep sacrificing your zombie army token every single turn for value, again, to drain your opponents in most circumstances. That way, then you get another one and you're not just building up a single one. But yeah, then of course, Bitter Blossom is the better version of this, though again, a ton more expensive. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 Black Fairy Rogue creature token with flying. Regardless, of course, a fantastic way of making an absurd amount of tokens throughout the game. Some other cards to consider depending on the direction that you want to take this deck, and again, you know, if your playgroup's okay with these, Draenith Magistrate, some hate bears, let's talk about them. Your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands, so yeah, this shuts down commanders, and again, with Lurrus or with some other effects, we can of course get this back again, and again, and again. So your opponents are basically locked out of their commanders. Speaking of locking players out, how about Grand Abolisher? During your turn, if your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. So this can essentially ensure that we're protected on our turns, and our opponents just have to sit and watch us do our thing. Another kind of card to consider might be Kataki War's Wage, which says all artifacts have at the beginning of your upkeep sacrifice artifact unless you pay 1. So this is a taxing effect that can be brutal, especially against, you know, artifact decks and, you know, anyone who's depending upon, you know, a ton of mana rocks to really actually have their deck perform. Moving on, though, we also have some other low-to-the-ground creatures that comprise an absurd amount of value throughout the game. Let's talk about Esper Sentinel first. It says whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, draw a card unless the player pays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. So yeah, basically like a Mystic Remora, kind of, but on a creature. Or how about Archivist of Ogma? It's a 2/2 with flash that says whenever an opponent searches their library, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Yeah, in a lot of Commander games out there, players search their libraries quite often. I mean, any kind of a land ramp, or even just like an Evolving Wilds, any kind of a fetch land is going to trigger this. And of course, that's not even just counting, you know, when people tutor for things as well. Or how about Deep Gnome Terromancer, which says whenever 1 or more lands enter the battlefield under opponent's control without being played, you may search your library for a Plains card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Do this only once each turn. So yeah, again, land ramp happens quite often in Commander, or again, you know, just Evolving Wilds that can trigger this too. So you can ramp quite quickly with this. Now, of course, also keep in mind that Lurrus only applies to, you know, permanents when it comes to that CMC requirement. So, of course, we can utilize some fantastic instant sorceries like, you know, Living Death and Ad Nauseam. Living Death says each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures they control, then puts all cards they exile this way onto the battlefield. So this and other mass reanimation effects can, of course, really help this kind of a deck out. Speaking of helping out, though, there's Ad Nauseam, which says really top card of your library and put that card in your hand. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. You may repeat this process any number of times. Again, with this deck's extremely low curve, we can basically lose, well, not much life at all when we're utilizing this. And again, we've got tons of ways to gain a ton of life. So, I mean, you kind of have the potential to basically draw nearly your entire deck if you really want to with this. Moving on, another potential line of play with this Commander-Companion combination might be even a combo strategy. Of course, you've got plenty of great tutors in these colors. I mean, Kaya's Ghost Form, Thornbite Staff, and Soldavi Adonate can be a great combo around Lurrus. Kaya's Ghost Form says enchant creature planeswalker you control. When it dies or is put in exile, return the card to the battlefield under your control. Thornbite Staff says, well, a lot of things, but the most important thing is when it's attached to a creature, it says whenever a creature is put in a graveyard from play, untap this creature. And Soldavi Adonate can tap to sacrifice a black artifact creature to add an amount of black equal to that creature's casting cost. So essentially put Kaya's Ghost Form on Lurrus and put Thornbite Staff on Soldavi Adonate. Tap Soldavi Adonate to sacrifice Lurrus to add black, black, black to your mana pool. Of course, that will trigger Kaya's Ghost Form, so Lurrus is going to come right back and also trigger Thornbite Staff since, you know, Lurrus went to the graveyard, so yeah, you untap Soldavi Adonate as well. Then with Lurrus, you can cast Kaya's Ghost Form from your graveyard. Then you can do this again and again and again, because yeah, every single time you sacrifice and bring back Lurrus, you've got a new Lurrus, technically, so you can keep casting Kaya's Ghost Form from your graveyard an infinite number of times. Or, you know, I should say infinite, but you are also generating infinite mana. And of course, with that, yeah, you just win with your commander because, I mean, you don't even need the infinite mana, right? Because you're just draining your opponents out with Lurrus dying again and again and again. So this is one very effective combo you can consider. And yeah, again, keep in mind, all of these cards have a converted mana cost of 2 or less. And one more low mana value combo really quick is Animate Dead or Dance of the Dead with Leonin Relic Warder. Animate Dead and Dance the Dead are very weird old cards that work in a very strange way. Basically, you enchant a creature in your graveyard, which then reanimates that creature, bring it back into play, and then the Animate Dead or Dance the Dead essentially turn into an aura that, say enchant creature. So yeah, very weird old cards and how they actually function, but basically, when that Animated Dead or Dance the Dead leaves the battlefield, that creature's controller sacrifices the creature. And then Leonin Relic Warder has, when it enters the battlefield, you can exile target artifact or enchantment, and when it leaves the battlefield, you return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So the combo is actually pretty straightforward, again, even though Animate Dead and Dance the Dead are very weird cards. But basically, Animate Dead, Leonin Relic Warder to get it back into play from your graveyard. Then with Leonin Relic Warder's ETB, exile Animate Dead. Since Animate Dead left the battlefield, you need to sacrifice the Relic Warder, and then Animate Dead comes back from exile, which you then use to enchant the Relic Warder again to bring it back and start this cycle again and again and again. So you've got infinite ETBs, infinite death triggers, and yeah, your commander says, let's drain our opponents out. So yeah, there are a couple of combos that you can even utilize again on the smallest of mana costs. Okay, again, I guess technically if you had an entire deck that was 1 mana, you got me, but okay, 2. Some of the very smallest mana values. But now as this episode is coming to a close, it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on this commander. Now, I probably should mention, obviously, yeah, this commander does not need to be built with Lurrus as a companion, though I am sure that many players out there that have been excited and waiting for Lurrus to actually, have a pretty good commander that they can build around with it as a companion. I bet there are quite a few Lurrus builds out there for this. But yeah, outside of that, of course, there are plenty of great cards above 2 mana that work great with this as well, so keep those in mind. And yeah, this, I think, is a commander that many players are going to be excited about. Again, an Aristocrat style strategy is a very popular one, and basically now just having, a Blood Artist or, more so like a Zulport Cutthroat in your command zone, players are going to be excited. So again, if you are excited about this commander and you want to build around it and maybe utilize some of the cards I talked about in this episode, make sure you check out that card list link in the description below. And of course, also make sure you check out my other quick takes and spoilers, including the ones coming up. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.